I grew up in the mountains west, and have had a lot of love for the outdoors as long as I can remember. Something about the practically limitless opportunities to explore and discover new things, to stumble upon something that few people have ever seen before, absolutely fascinated me in every way. You could never keep me inside as a kid. I would be out and about, trying to find new sights to see or trees to climb. The world was my jungle gym. I spent my youth in the Scouts and volunteering at summer camps. Let's just say I didn't shock anybody when I ended up becoming a park ranger after I graduated from college. My first job was in a park that was somewhat small and didn't have many staff on top of its piss-poor management already, and I found myself taking on all sorts of jobs throughout my time there. My tasks had their ups and downs, but none of them ever compared to the experience I had while patrolling a section of the reserve's forestry. Now, this is going to sound a bit dramatic, and perhaps it is, but that week was a turning point in how I approached my life in general. Up until then, I had an upbeat, optimistic guy, always trying to see the best in others. I had a very strong love for people, animals, and the planet we resided on. I mean, I still do to a degree, but I definitely approached my sentiment a far more naive manner in the past. While I was patrolling the forest that first day, the smell of smoke breezed past my nose. I turned my head into the direction it was in, continuously catching whiffs as I followed where it was coming from. There, I found a small fire pit made up of boulders, probably no more than 3 feet in diameter. The fire inside seemed as if it had been out for some time, so I knew the chances of me catching the person who built it were slim, which was a bit frustrating. Visitors were absolutely not allowed to start fires, except in designated areas during certain times of the year, and for very good reason. In the past, I had caught teenagers with all sorts of things, but few items ever presented a legitimate danger to the park. So, of course, the one time I stumbled upon something that I did, I had no indication of who was responsible. Not knowing what else to do, I dismantled the fire pit in hopes to discourage its creator from making one again, should they ever pass through the area once more. The rest of the day was pretty boring, if I was being honest. I always took the time to appreciate the nature around me, but that didn't mean it was particularly exciting. I returned to work the next day, already having forgotten about the fire pit situation from the previous night. I had already let the other staff and my superiors know about it, but like me, they mostly just shrugged their shoulders and said to let me know if I found anything else. And as it turned out later on in the day, I did. But it wasn't anything inherently dangerous. However, it did feel far more threatening than the fire pit. I wound up spotting a grimy old stuffed animal of a deer, a string wrapped around its neck as it was suspended from a tree branch. Something about that chilled me, far more than if the figure were something like a human doll. I guess if that were the case, it would feel too obvious, like somebody was trying too hard to spook people. Why would somebody choose a toy deer out of all things to suspend from a tree was beyond me at the time. I checked out the area a bit more and made out yet another fire pit. I wasn't too far away from the area where I had found the one from the previous day, so I was certain I would have stumbled upon it already. I began to wonder if the perpetrator returned after I left the site and reconstructed their fire pit. I took a deep breath and rolled my eyes, talking into my walkie-talkie about the second pit I found, and then went over to deconstruct it. Just to be sure I wasn't going insane, I left the site and didn't return until later in the evening. Nothing was there. Satisfied with my work, I went home for the day. I had the next day off, but requested my coworkers to keep me in the loop about whether or not they'd seen any new fire pits emerge. I didn't get any news. I was patrolling a different area of the park day after day, and of course, once more, stumbled upon a fire pit. However, this time, it didn't have any wood in it actually, just a circle of rocks. I still reported it nonetheless, and it wasn't long before I heard my boss over the walkie-talkie tell me to quit being so paranoid. I just sighed, simply kicking the structure apart. I despised this game of cat and mouse that I was playing. When I went on my lunch break, I decided to head back to one of the buildings and get some snacks out of the vending machines. I asked the other staff if the night patrol noticed anything strange, and that's when I learned that the night patrol didn't actually do anything, and mostly just dicked around and drank. When I asked if they were the ones responsible for building the fire pits, they told me no. I also brought up the hanged stuffed deer, which was met with a few laughs. Nobody really seemed to be bothered with what was going on, as I was. I was definitely the odd one out. Even though I wasn't getting paid to stay past my shift, I decided to stick around when night came anyway, and just go home late, or sleep in my car if need be. I was young, curious, and determined, and figured that catching the person who was building all those fire pits was worth my time. I didn't tell anybody I was staying, out of fear that they'd give me a hard time, or make me go home. I turned off my walkie-talkie and stuck around the area where I had found most of the recent fire pit. After a few moments, I began to hear the sound of people talking and pacing around. It wasn't long before a flashlight had come into view, and I could make out two men walking around in what appeared to be gray cloaks, holding bags that seemed to be stuffed to the brim. I was as perplexed as anybody would be. One of them grumbled about how that guy kept kicking down their fire pits, and I watched as they built it once more. I was so curious and fascinated that I had completely forgotten to even try and put a stop to their antics. I was armed, so I wasn't endangered in that sense, but I had no idea what these guys could be carrying. One of them opened this bag. There was just a bunch of sticks in there, and the other lit the fire. I watched them walk around as they seemed to light up more fire pits, until the entire area made out a ring of flame. There were a few calls, and a third cloaked man came out with a ladder. The second bag was opened, and from what I could indicate, there was just a bunch of stuffed animals inside. I watched as they stringed up the animals onto the trees before going to the center of the ring and lighting up what appeared to be a candle in the middle. One of them made a comment on how they needed to make it quick, to which the other argued that their process couldn't be rushed. I had no clue what was going on, and looking back, I still don't understand what their goal was. They all faced each other, and two more men came out of the woods and joined them. They sat cross-legged and let out low, melodic hums. By now, I knew it had to be some sort of cult ritual, and I was split on whether or not to intervene. I had no idea whether this was a nightly thing or something they only planned on doing once, and if that was the case, I knew I would rather leave them alone and let them finish up and leave, so they wouldn't be a problem anymore. Another part of me knew it was my responsibility to keep the park safe. Even if it was past my shift, I was still on the site. I admit, I don't know what inherent danger the men posed to the park, besides the fire, of course, which was still not allowed. It seemed to be well controlled, for the most part. These guys just creeped me the hell out. I could have approached them, but at the same time, like I said before, I had no idea what kinds of weaponry they could have concealed under their cloaks. I decided to head back a bit before turning my walkie-talkie back on and informing the rest of the staff about what I had just discovered. They were mostly confused, about both what I was describing and why I was still around past my shift. I explained that I stayed in order to see what was going on, and at this point, was getting pretty fed up with nobody else doing their job properly. So I cussed them out a bit. They told me they would come up to help, but after 20 minutes with no sign of anybody, I decided to go back and confront my coworkers face to face. They were, of course, drunk and didn't particularly believe me. I had to practically drag them out of my car and haul them to the place. However, by the time my headlights shone in the area, it was completely dark. We got out of the car. I took out my flashlight, and the stuffed animals were still hanging in the trees. The fire pits, while no longer burning, emitted smoke. The sight seemed to make my coworkers sober up, and we investigated the area a bit more. When we couldn't find the men, we sent out people to look for them. We came across several corpses of animals, such as deer, raccoons, and coyotes, all with rope tied around their neck. We cut it off before leaving the animals to rest and dismantled the site of the ritual. There wasn't much else we could do, and the search ultimately turned up nothing, and the fire pits stopped being built altogether. No more stuffed animals were discovered hanging from trees either. Like I said, this event shifted my entire mindset. While I still loved the outdoors, exploring it and discovering the things it offered, it was also a great venue to conceal darker parts of the world. I suppose I just tread the world more carefully now, and I've become a bit pessimistic in regards to my career. It has been a long time since I have worked at that park, and granted, I have stumbled across plenty of close calls in the wild since. Confrontations with grizzlies, for example. Still, none of them ever shook me like that event. And to this day, I still feel a bit creeped out when I came across a neat pile of rocks